realistic now, and I think they're thinking hard about it. The French, they had a big movement with Marine Le Pen in the past, and I think Kurt Wilders as well was ardent opponent as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, Gareth, ardent opponents, but not in a majority position.
No, obviously not. But I think the European Union needs to at least acknowledge the fact that there is this sort of sentiment being sort of espoused by these countries, and maybe giving them the choice now would be a good way to maybe appease these voices for one, and just maybe give a dog a bone for once.
Well, but Madrid will fight very hard against this. Juncker has said after the Brexit vote he doesn't want there ever to be any more referendums again. So there'll be a lot of opposition, won't there?
All their money, isn't it?
Well, that's part of it. That's part of it. Yeah. I mean, there are some, Gareth, in this country that think that we shouldn't have referendums, that we should trust our political class to get on and govern our country. And my answer to them is that actually Brexit proved why a referendum can be valuable, because sometimes the people have a different point of view to those that are leading us. And that is, to me, an expression of democracy. But I promise you, Gareth, I promise you the opposition to this vote taking place will be huge, even though it's likely at the moment that Puigdemont would lose on the question of leaving the European Union. But then again, everyone thought that about Brexit too, didn't they? So, Gareth, let me just ask you, if you were a Catalan and a follower of Puigdemont, and this referendum did take place, would you vote for Catalonia to leave the EU?
100%.
100%. Gareth, you're a star. Thank you very much. Great to have you on. Cheryl from Sutton says, do you think that President Trump will be invited to the royal wedding? Great show. Thank you. Well, President Trump went to France on Bastille Day, and despite his huge disagreements with Macron, got the red carpet treatment. He's been to Saudi Arabia. He's been to Warsaw. He's been travelling all over the world. And treated with the respect that an American president should. And yet we're told that when he comes to this country, it won't be a state visit. It'll be downgraded to a working trip for reasons that totally baffle me. And I'll say for the second time at the start of this show, whether you like him or not, he's actually really rather important in the world, and potentially rather important to our future. Cheryl, I hope he does come to the royal wedding, because, as I say, I feel the announcement of this engagement made the Atlantic get just a little bit narrower. Not everyone sees it that way. Someone says to me here on Twitter, not really funny, though. Sounds like more inane whining about not being liked enough. I don't think you get the joke. I don't think you get the joke. Yes, of course, he does rail and rant about the media sometimes, but that tweet, when he says, your favourite president, brackets me, he's laughing at himself as well. Cheer up, everybody. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. Deposed leader Carlos Puigdemont says Catalonia should have a referendum on its future membership of the European Union, who he now describes as a club of decadent and obsolescent countries. Gosh, makes me sound like an EU supporter, this chap. Mind you, they did support the wounding of 900 people who attempted to go and vote on the morning of October the 1st, and now there is a European arrest warrant out on him, and he will be deported very shortly from Brussels back to Madrid, and no doubt, because the charges are rebellion and sedition, be immediately put in prison. In fact, nearly all of his cabinet is in prison. Quite how, in these circumstances, the elections that the Prime Minister Rajoy has called for the 21st of December can go ahead and be seen to be free and fair if most of the opposition are in prison, I simply don't know. So should the Catalans have this referendum? That's what I'm asking you. And by the way, when I make mistakes, I always say so. And I said earlier that Donald Trump had 35 million Twitter followers. I was wrong. It's 43 million. So there we go. Mark in Chelsea is my first caller in this section. Mark, do they deserve to have their voice heard?
Well, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, Nigel, but it should be Lord Nigel Farage, to be quite honest.
Not much chance of that, but anyway.
No chance of that, not with these hypocrites here in Britain. But apart from that, no, of course they should. And do you know why? Because what you've done for this country, you fought and fought and fought to get us that vote, and we got that vote, and we come out, and that's what they're fighting. The EU are fighting of another country coming out, and that would be the end of the EU, and I think it's going to go, to be quite honest with you.
Yes, well, I mean, a lot of people think that, but of course, having an opposition movement, you know, whether it's in France or Poland or whatever it is, turning that into a majority is no easy thing, Mark, is it? Because you're up against, you know, the vested interests of the establishment.
Well, you are, because most of those countries rely on the money from the EU. That's all it comes back to, Nigel, at the end of the day. But there is support out in those countries, as you say, like Poland. There is massive to walk away. I mean, I think Poland at this moment in time is having massive arguments with the EU. It
certainly is, and so is Hungary. And I don't think the Czech Republic and Slovakia are exactly on sort of, you know, Sunday afternoon tea with mum type relations. Mark, I tell you what, let me just try an idea with you, because Graham sent me a text. I wonder whether you agree with this. He says, every citizen in every EU country should have a vote on membership. Without public support, the EU, like a house built upon sand, will surely fall. Is Graham right? Should everybody have a vote, just to sort of legitimise European armies, advanced foreign policy, etc.?
100%. 100%. Everybody should have a vote on that.
Do you know, Mark, I said that to the EU bosses back in 2003-04 when they launched their constitution for Europe. In the end, it did get rejected, and they rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty. And I said then, OK, you know, you've basically conned people by calling it the Lisbon Treaty. It's the same blooming thing. I think every country in Europe, Mark, is what I said to them, because, you know, I'm really popular over there. I said, I think every country in Europe should have a vote on this, because you're taking massive, massive powers to the centre. And that concept was rejected. One country had a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. One country. That country was called Ireland. And guess what they said? They said no, so they were forced to vote again. So, Mark, I think you, Graham, many others, I think we have reached a point in this where actually I think either the project is legitimised or, frankly, it'll break apart, but probably in very unpleasant circumstances. Mark, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Jim says, well, surely, as Catalonia is still a part of Spain, they surely need independence first. Jim, that is absolutely logical, but actually, one supersedes the other, doesn't it? Because if they did vote to leave the European Union in a referendum, they would be voting to leave both, and maybe, you know, they have both of those questions on the same ballot paper on the same day. I don't know, but effectively, Spain is, as a government, utterly committed to European Union membership, and the EU have said if Catalonia separates from Spain, that they'll be kicked out of the European Union. And effectively what Puigdemont's saying is bring it on. So constitutionally, I get the order of what you're saying. But I think the truth of it is, Jim, that everybody is going to do their damnedest to deny them a referendum. I suspect Carlos Puigdemont is going to be calling for referendums maybe for the next 1, 2, 3 years. And he certainly isn't going to get back into power in these elections on December the 21st if he's in prison, is he? Steve is a new caller from Harlow. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, has Puigdemont got this right? I mean, he was really quite abusive about the European Union, wasn't he?
Yes, sure. Yes, I believe he has got this right. But, yes, I think they should have a vote, and they should have a referendum, without a doubt. But what I liked about Puigdemont, and I just want to touch on a subject that actually never gets touched on, is that Puigdemont was in talks about backing their currency with cryptocurrency.
He did hint at that, Steve. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But what I want to talk about, Nigel, now I've actually got you on a phone call, which is really interesting for me, is because I always want to talk about, I call it the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the creation of our debt-based currency. The fact that we print debt rather than printing from a value-based currency, i.e. when we had the gold standard. So...
Yeah, Steve, we're going off. I mean, look, I can tell this interests you as a subject, and it is actually worthy, you know, of an hour's debate, maybe a 2-hour debate one day on this subject. All I would say to you is this, Steve, you're right. in that we do have fiat currency and we do have governments creating money. But equally, when we had the gold standard and when we had money that was fixed directly to gold, equally, our currencies were fixed against the currencies of our neighbours and our trading partners and competitors. And in some ways, that meant being in the gold standard was as bad in some cases as being in the euro. So, Steve, I'm going to let you go on that point because it's a subject for another day. But what is fascinating is the rise of cryptocurrencies. Just look at the value of Bitcoin and look at the fact that central banks are now beginning to recognise Bitcoin as not being something from the extreme margins, but now being a recognised, valid means of exchange. There may be major monetary changes to come throughout the world. Perhaps they've started already. I'm looking for people to tell me that actually it's up to the Spanish to say whether the Catalans have a referendum of any kind at all, because so far you all seem to think that Puigdemont is right. Or maybe Andreas takes a different view on Facebook. That doesn't make sense. There's no way they'll get independence. And if they ever should do, they would automatically be out of the EU too. Well, yeah, Andreas, this is the odd one, isn't it? If they voted to leave Spain, they've left the European Union anyway. So it wouldn't really matter almost what the referendum was on. The question is, should they have a referendum or not? More of this. The whole of Europe deserves an in-out referendum, not just Catalonia. So quite a few people are beginning to agree with that point of view, that actually the entire European project needs to be legitimised because nobody has ever voted for the sheer extent of powers that are currently in the hands of my friend Mr Juncker and that lovely Mr Barnier, who seems to like us just so much, doesn't he? Sam is calling from Poplar. Good evening, Sam.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, should this be a Madrid decision, ultimately, whether they have a vote, or should the Catalans just be able to do it?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I think it's really wrong that the EU took the attitude of violence within the voting booths, dragging people out of the voting booths, arresting political leaders. That's obviously wrong.
Yes.
But equally, we have to remember that this was an unofficial referendum. It obviously posed a challenge to them. And I think the fact that obviously it hasn't been recognised as an official referendum is correct because it wasn't called as an official one in the first place. But having said that...
Sam, wouldn't it have been wiser then for Madrid to say, look, this is not constitutional, you can have your vote if you want, but it won't count for anything? Wouldn't that have been a brighter way to approach this?
No, absolutely, I agree. And I mean, obviously, the importance of democracy and, for example, the EU referendum we had here showed that the political class certainly don't always have it right. But I think that, as you say, it's kind of now... Since they've had this unofficial referendum and there's been such a bad feeling, I think they have to have and give them the opportunity for official referendum now because they've sort of done it in such a bad way, the EU, and treated the Catalonian people so badly that they've sort of left them with no other choice or to show that they are very corrupt individuals.
The chances are, Sam, that if Madrid says, right, OK, you can have a vote on whether you stay part of Spain or not, understanding that if you vote to leave Spain, you are in effect voting to leave the EU as well, because Brussels has said they wouldn't have you anyway. The chances are, Sam, in my view, if on the 1st of October that referendum had taken place officially with Spanish sanction, I think a majority would probably have voted to stay part of Spain and the European Union. But I do feel, and this is where we started our call and where we agree totally, I do feel the way they've behaved has actually been just, well, I was to say red rags to a bull, but let's not talk about bullfighting when there's a big animal rights row going on about our membership of the European Union. Quite why anyone thinks that leaving the EU is bad for animal rights. I can't quite get that. But Sam, they have basically fed Puigdemont, haven't they? But you think, despite all that's been said and done, do you think the Spanish will give them a vote?
I don't think they will, no, and I think that's wrong. And as you say, the stupid thing is, if they'd have given them the official referendum in the first place, they quite well might have voted to stay part of Spain anyway. So now They've only antagonised the people of not only Catalonia but the rest of Europe, and you could well see other independent states. So, for example, I mean, it's unlikely, but Cornwall, let's say, there's an independent sort of opinion down there. Maybe you'll see people like that saying, well, look, if they're going to treat us like this and they're going to treat the peoples of Europe with such contempt, then we're going to start calling referendums on our own countries as well.
Well, you know, I promise you, I don't think the demand, and I'm very happy for Cornish callers to ring in and tell me I'm wrong, I don't think the demand for a referendum in Cornwall is all that great. You know, referendums happen, Sam, when something's reached boiling point, when there is a real demand for it to happen. Sam, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Agnes tweets at me, a state visit for Trump, not 1 penny of my tax should be spent on state honours for that fantasist. There you are. He does excite great passion. That's why he's got 43 million people following him on Twitter. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30, and as Carlos Puigdemont goes mega Eurosceptic and says the Catalans should have a vote on leaving the European Union, I'm asking you whether actually the Catalans should be given that vote or whether indeed it should be Spain's decision. Meanwhile, as this show is going on, Priti Patel is speaking in London. It's an event hosted, I think, by The Spectator, and she said there should have been clarity from the government on Brexit, and she would have told the EU to SOD off with their financial demands. Unleashed now that she's been sacked from her position in the cabinet, she says the Tory party has to give power back to the grassroots. It has to completely recalibrate and start again, start from scratch, with party hierarchies giving members votes for things such as the party chairman, and she blasts the government for failings over a lack of vision for Brexit. So pretty strong stuff. She was a supporter of the Leave campaign, and I know she believes in Brexit very, very passionately. I wonder whether... So there are two ways of reading this. One is that she's upset she lost her job because of all the meetings she had in Israel, and she's just lashing out because of it. The other is actually boiling away within the cabinet are deep resentments on both sides of the argument, and Theresa May having a very difficult job of holding the whole thing together. There we are. I've said something nice about Mrs May. That'll surprise all of you. No, the point is, either way, whether she's up to the job of being PM or not, goodness me, she's got one hell of a difficult job with that cabinet, let alone with Monsieur Barnier and our friends across the water. And one piece of positive news, why not? Britain and Turkey have begun work on a post-Brexit free trade agreement, the Turkish Prime Minister has said. He said the talks will go on in parallel with the Brexit negotiations that, of course, you know, he understands we can't sign until we've actually left, but says this: once the UK moves out of the EU, the UK will belong to the same club as Turkey. And that club, folks, is called the world. And there are dozens of countries all over the world queuing up who want to have closer, better trade relationships with us, but we can't actually sign a blooming thing until we've left the European Union. Miles is calling me from Birmingham, a new caller to the show. So, constitutionally, Miles, any referendum in Catalonia must be decided by Spain.
Yes, I actually, well, you were mentioning the Lisbon Treaty there earlier on. I have to say that I personally think that was absolutely appalling, the way Ireland had to have a second referendum and they kind of went against us. And fundamentally, I believe that everybody's got the right to vote. I do go to Barcelona quite a lot, and I was in the Catalan region, and I do think that, I don't really think that they would vote to, I think the majority of people would vote to remain, but I think that they have a right to vote, and I think the Spanish government have also been absolute idiots the way they've handled the whole situation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, Miles. I couldn't agree more.
With regards to the Brexit situation, I was a vote Remainer, much to the hostility of some of my family members, and I would say that I would have changed my mind and gone towards you, Mr. Farage.
Right. Okay. No, Miles, that's interesting. Thank you. Look, do you know, before October the 1st, I'd heard these calls for Catalan separation, and I'd never really expressed an opinion on them at all. I'm generally suspicious, Miles, of separatist elements. I've always wondered whether there's another agenda going on somewhere there. What changed my mind on this completely was the way the Spanish government and then the European Union behaved. And I then thought, this is monstrous. You know, to physically intimidate and beat people with sticks and pull them out by their hair and stop them voting makes me much more sympathetic to Mr. Puigdemont than I ever was before. And you're probably right, Miles, when you say that if that referendum took place, probably, although we can never tell, of course. I mean, hey, look at 2016. Just look at it. We had Brexit, Trump, and then the big one, Leicester City. I mean, all three happening in 1 year. You know, a £1 triple accumulator on those three at the start of 2016 would have paid 25 million quid. So we never quite know what's going to happen in life. But I think the only way, Miles, my view, the only way that this crisis, and it is a crisis with half the cabinet in prison, the only way it can be resolved is by having that referendum. Would you agree?
Of course, I would agree.
Yeah.
I've got one other comment, and that is that I totally disagree with you with regards when it comes to Mr. Trump. How can I trust somebody who uses a sunbed more than you?
I've never used a sunbed in my life, Miles. But thank you for the call and for that parting shot. Thank you very much. Sunbed? I don't know. Blood pressure in my case. Patrick is calling from Colchester. So, should Catalonia have the right to a referendum, or is this still firmly, really, constitutionally and correctly in the hands of Spain?
Well, Nigel, I have a question for you, but before I come to that, as you can hear from my accent, I am Irish, but I do not belong to that 81% of the Irish people who we are told support the European Union. In fact, I deplore the way the Irish politicians are being used now.
Well, Patrick, Patrick, do you know, I'm always being told by Irish politicians and Irish media, because I do go to Dublin occasionally, and I'm due to go back there in February, and I'm always being told, Patrick, oh, Nigel, you know, you won't find any friends here in Ireland. Everybody here loves the European Union, and yet they rejected the Nice Treaty and they rejected the Lisbon Treaty. And when you see a poll, Patrick, telling you that the whole of Ireland's in love with the European Union, do you know what? I don't believe it.
Well, I don't believe it either, but one of the reasons that I voted Brexit was because of the deplorable way in which the European Union acted when Ireland had twice voted in referenda and then been forced to vote again until they got the right result. And please God, the people of Britain or the people of England are not going to do that and are not going to capitulate.
No, they won't.
And I'm very, very sad.
They won't. No,
the way that
Patrick, they won't. I get your passion. They won't. But what about Catalonia, Patrick? How do you see that?
That is the question. Now, will you tell me, is Catalonia a province of Spain or is it a nation? And if you support the right of Catalonia to have a separate referendum from Spain, would you then support the right of the region of Northern Ireland to have a separate referendum from the UK, seeing that that region did vote to stay in the European Union in your last referendum?
Well, we voted as a United Kingdom in the UK referendum. If there was an overwhelming demand in Northern Ireland to have a referendum on its future, then you couldn't deny it. I mean, either you believe in the democratic process or you don't. But I don't think you have constitutional referendums flippantly. I think they're done when there is a real genuine desire and need to do it, Patrick. And as I said to the previous caller, Patrick, I'm generally, you know, slightly sceptical about separatist movements. And I was slightly sceptical about the Catalan separatist movement. But when I saw the way Spain behaved, I then became a supporter of the idea that they should have a right to have a say. So that's how I feel about it.
Well, I understand how you feel, and I thought that the action of the Spanish police was deplorable.
Yes.
But nevertheless, I think Catalonia is a part of Spain, and I think if there was a genuine referendum where everybody had the freedom to vote, and I believe that it would still vote to stay in Spain. But, you know, I think that you may be, there may be something odd about you supporting the right of the Catalonians to have that separate referendum and the right of the Northern Irish not to have.
Well, I haven't seen, Patrick, I haven't seen a demand for a referendum in Northern Ireland, and I also think, actually, that if it came to a referendum in Northern Ireland about leaving the United Kingdom and rejoining the European Union by joining up with ERA, that, of course, would mean them joining the Euro and, of course, joining the new European army. And I wonder whether that wouldn't actually perhaps concentrate the minds. Patrick, thank you for your call. Thank you for your passion. Michael says to me on Twitter, of course they should have a referendum in Catalonia. And if Puigdemont wins, the losers can blame Russian meddling. And the same point that was being made there. Why not Scotland and Northern Ireland having their own say on Brexit? Divide and conquer is a winning strategy when you're doing the dividing, not the other way around. Well, look, Mattia, the point is that Scotland did have a referendum in 2014, and even the SNP's call for another referendum have gone really rather silent. The Scots would not vote to join the euro in a referendum. It simply wouldn't happen. And even the prospect of having to join the euro is one of the main reasons why Alex Salmond lost that referendum by 10 clear points back in 2014. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. The time is 7:45. Should Catalonia have a referendum on its future? Their deposed leader, Carles Puigdemont, is saying that he thinks they should have a referendum on EU membership. But actually, the truth of it is, even a referendum on staying part of Spain would be one and the same thing, given that if they vote to leave Spain, the boys in Brussels have said they wouldn't want them. And they thought that threat would be enough, I think, to change Puigdemont's mind. And he really has come back today. And he's called them a club of decadent and obsolescent countries controlled by a small few and closely linked to increasingly debatable economic interests. And what he really means by that is the big banks and the big multinationals. I'm looking for people to tell me, and I'm struggling to find people to tell me. I'm getting a few comments through now where people asking me whether, if I think now Catalonia should have its say, whether Northern Ireland and Scotland should have its say. But I'm struggling to find people now in sympathy with the Spanish government over this. And that's really interesting, because we started talking on this show about Catalonia really well before most other people did. It's a theme we've talked about. I think it really matters because it gets to the heart of what is a nation, to whether a referendum is the right way of sorting these things out, and indeed to what the future of the European Union is. And I've said before that if Catalonia were to vote to leave, that would make Brexit look like a Sunday afternoon picnic as far as Mr. Juncker and the others are concerned. But I sense in the last 2 months, since we started to debate this, sympathy for Spain is waning. But if you do still have sympathy for Spain, if you think Puigdemont perhaps has behaved very badly, then call me on 0345 60 60 973. Bernie says, can you imagine how much the Catalan divorce bill would be? Well, yeah, it's a very, very good point. Now, I get one here. Given that London has massively voted Remain, would Nigel Farage support a referendum on the separation of London to respect the will of Londoners? As far as I was aware, London has never claimed to be a nation. So I think that argument is utterly and entirely bogus. I mean, look, Cambridge voted to remain and Norwich voted to leave. Are you suggesting we have referendums everywhere? No, it doesn't work, does it? This is about a major constitutional change. You know, it is about what nationhood is, and there is no doubt there are many in Catalonia for centuries have felt in many ways separate to the rest of Spain. The question is, do they command a majority? I don't think they do. But then I never thought Leicester City would win the league last year. I'm going to ask Glenn from Milton Keynes, a new caller to the show. Glenn, what do you think? Good evening.
Oh, Nigel, how the devil are you?
I'm all right, thank you very much indeed. And I find myself, Glenn, in this really odd position of being somebody who's never really supported separatist movements, but now finding myself really in quite strong sympathy with a lot of what Mr. Puigdemont's saying.
Trouble is, I mean, you know, Catalans should have two votes, you know, one to leave Spain, one to leave Europe. But, you know, the bully boys there ain't going to let that happen. I mean, going back to Ireland, I've got a lot of friends, I'm in the building trade, I've got a lot of friends, you know, Irish families, this said, and they all say, I can't imagine, you know, them saying, they all say that, you know, they were angry that they had a second vote in Ireland because money was pumped into Ireland, blackmailed them.
Big time.
And most of them said that, you know, who wants to be a club with a bunch of bully boys? I mean, that's why I can't understand all these people sort of saying, you know, it's good for us and all that. I mean, that 40 billion that we're giving, or we're supposed to be giving, to trade with them, what are they giving us to trade with us? You know,
Well, given that... No, I mean, Glenn, given, of course, they sell us more than we sell them, you think they should pay us, yeah?
Well, we're paying them to be part of them. What are they paying to be part of us? I mean, it don't make sense. I mean, the people who are running the show, you know, I mean, it's laughable, really, isn't it?
Well, I have to say, I can't see what 40 billion is. I don't see where it's been derived from. And I've been thinking, Glenn, about this over the weekend. If the British government is to make a financial offer of any kind at all, I think it's about time we stop this ludicrous game of shadow boxing where, you know, in the sort of quiet corners of Brussels, we're upping the offer and they're saying it's not big enough. I reckon what we ought to do is to itemise. Why don't we call their bluff? Let's itemise what we think we owe them and what we think they owe us and get it out there, Glenn, into the open, have a proper honest debate. But we shouldn't, Glenn, pay them a penny unless we're guaranteed something in return.
Well, how can it be done? I mean, people in the side won't let us do that. You know that. How do you force them?
Well, no. The cabinet could decide. The cabinet could say, right, OK, let's pursue a different strategy. This one's not working. Let's publish what we think they owe us, what we believe we owe them, and let's challenge Mr. Barnier to come back on these figures. And why not have this debate in public rather than it going on behind closed doors?
Well, once she says yes, you could have 40 billion. And they say, thank you very much. That's the end of the story, isn't it?
Well, look, you know, if we were... I mean, I can't believe, and I don't want to believe, that a British Prime Minister would offer 40 billion sterling in return for perhaps we'll have a conversation about trade. And I simply can't believe that would happen. Do you know what, Glenn? I think people like you would be so blooming angry if we handed over a vast... gargantuan sum of money, and didn't get anything in return. If we did get something in return, let's say there was a genuine deal that they were going to give us a trade deal, and we'd agreed to pay them, let's say, a more reasonable sum, much lower than that, obviously. Very good suggestion today from Matt Ridley, a journalist writing in the Times, is if we do finish up having to pay something to the European Union, we should take it out of the foreign aid budget and get them to sign a piece of paper to say they're actually going to spend the money on what they say it's intended for. Now, that would be very interesting. Glenn, thank you. Got to move on. Got to get some more calls. People are missing the point here. Paul on Twitter, you're missing the point, Paul. If we support Catalonia, we have to support Cornwall and their wish for independence. Have you been to Cornwall, Paul? I mean, look, I've spent many years in Cornwall and I've campaigned in Cornwall and I've spoken at public events in Cornwall and schools in Cornwall. And, yeah, there is a Cornish nationalist movement. I mean, I remember chatting casually to a chap one day. He said, I go to England sometimes, and I looked at him. He meant, he goes over east of the River Tamar. There are some people who are Cornish nationalists, but if there was to be a referendum on it, it would be a huge waste of taxpayers' money, as I doubt they'd get 1.5% of the vote. These big constitutional votes about people's future within nations or within the new nation, the one with the flag and an anthem and Mr. Juncker, called the European Union. These are decisions for nations to take, and with the best will in the world. London, Cornwall, Cambridge don't qualify. Scotland has had a go at this, rejected it, and I think Northern Ireland would do very much the same thing too. Douglas in Cheltenham is my next caller. Good evening, Douglas.
Good evening, Nigel. Nigel, I just wanted to say you have dealt with this issue, as you said earlier on, for the last couple of months. And
yes,
I spend 6 months, 7 months of the year in Catalonia. I have lots and lots of Catalan friends. I was there on election day. I was there on the day of UDI. And I can tell you that it's very much appreciated, the fact that you and I think also Alex Salmond have dealt with this issue on the radio many times. So I just wanted to say it is very much appreciated, because the information that you provide is accurate and sensible and sensitive. So thanks for that. But what I wanted to say was, I think this issue of what Carlos Puigdemont has said about the EU is actually a bit of a distraction. And what I think we ought to be all concentrating upon is what happens on December the 21st, when the elections actually happen. And what I was going to ask you was, if if it's possible, during one of your trips over in Brussels, or to keep your eye on the ball of ensuring that Rajoy and Madrid allow all the candidates who stood in the last election to stand in the next elections on the 21st. That would be very much appreciated.
Douglas, do you know something? Do you know something? I've been trying to get the European Parliament to debate the Catalan crisis so that I can make that point that for these elections to be legitimate, they have to be free and fair. And they've refused so far to have that debate. Douglas, I thank you. I'm going to take Frederick from Ealing. You've got 30 seconds, Frederick. We're at the end of the show.
All right, thank you, Nigel. Look, let me quote something from Mr. Monnet, one of the founding members of Europe. Europe nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what's happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having economic purpose, but which will eventually and irrevocably lead to federation. Anybody who doesn't know this, and that he's probably never told us, should realize that the EU is a con. Catalonia and many other countries should get out of this.
And you are Catalan yourself, Frederick, are you?
I'm Catalan myself, born and bred. I've lived here for over 50 years, so I'm a kind of Englishman in disguise now.
And, okay, very good indeed. Frederick, I thank you very much indeed for that. My views on this are perfectly clear. I wasn't a sympathiser for Catalan separation. I do absolutely think they now should, absolutely must, have this referendum. It's the right thing, particularly given the bad way that Spain has behaved, and extraordinarily the EU supporting that kind of violent behaviour. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.